Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. Did Joe Biden's acceptance speech neutralize Donald Trump's questioning of Biden's cognitive abilities? That's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? That's a pretty provocative headline that I think I typed at the top or bottom of this Facebook Live. By the way, it is today's survey question over at my website at smirconish.com. So when we're finished here, I hope you'll go over to the website and cast your ballot. I, of course, watched every night of the Democratic debate, mostly from the Jersey Shore, which is where I just spent a week of vacation. Nice to go back to my Ocean City roots. And for those of us who grew up in this part of the country, it's funny how we all have an adherence to one particular shore town, don't we? Anyway, I'm watching Thursday night. And of course, Thursday night was the night that the Democrats brought the heavy lumber, all their star power. And so Thursday night, you had Gavin Newsom, and you had the two Tammys. You had Tammy Baldwin and Tammy Duckworth, and you had Keisha Lance Bottoms, and you had Chris Coons, who was such a confidant of Joe Biden and all things Delaware. They all spoke. And then I thought one of the better produced items was 7 of Joe Biden's primary rivals, all in a Zoom-like call, moderated more or less by Cory Booker. And so you had Booker, and you had Bernie, and you had Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Beto. Gosh, I forgot about Beto. Where has Beto been? Beto, Andrew Yang, and Mayor Pete. They were all together. And then the next marquee speaker was to be Michael Bloomberg. But who was sandwiched in between? Sandwiched in between was a New Hampshire teen, a 13-year-old, who is soon to be an 8th grader, by the way. I love that. Braden Harrington is his name. And Braden Harrington, which was his presentation, with just 2 minutes long, it was recorded in his New Hampshire bedroom. He was the showstopper. Forget all of those big names. What Braden Harrington had to do and had to say, I think, was more important than anything that preceded him or followed him. As I'm going to say on CNN today, he humanized a man 64 years his senior. And he did so by discussing his own battles with stuttering and how he had a private moment with Joe Biden last February out on the campaign trail, I think it was Concord, New Hampshire, in which he shared with Biden the story of his own affliction, and the former vice president took him under his wing and gave him some counsel, and it seems like it was a very special and potentially life-changing moment. But as I was watching this on Thursday night, before Joe Biden spoke, I said, this is blanking brilliant. It's brilliant because it's heartwarming. We all felt for that young man. We all think of, my gosh, if he were my son, you want to give him a hug and so forth. So it struck an emotional chord, but it also provided a level of inoculation for Joe Biden. And you know what I thought of? I thought of how in the Romney campaign, let me just think, that would have been 2012. In the Romney campaign, and those of you who listen to me on the radio have heard me say this before, do you remember the night of the Clint Eastwood fiasco with the chair? What gets lost about the night of the fiasco with the chair is that there were Mormon testimonials that were offered that night to Mitt Romney, including by a couple who lost their son, and Mitt Romney acting more or less as a missionary. And forgive me if I don't get the word choice proper within LDS, but Mitt Romney had gone out to the hospital room where a young man was fighting for his life and wrote the teen's last will and testament. And it was this phenomenal side of Mitt Romney that voters were never able to see, because those testimonials were aired out of prime time. And unless you watched C-SPAN, you never saw them. Instead, what you saw was Clint Eastwood in the chair, which was a total cluster. Romney didn't want to discuss his Mormon faith. I think that was a mistake. I think it would have been an asset, not a liability. And similarly, up until now, Joe hasn't wanted to discuss his stutter. Interestingly, Braden Harrington, the 13-year-old from New Hampshire, he met Joe Biden on the campaign trail last February. February is the same month that John Hendrickson, writing for The Atlantic, published an interview that he had done with Biden, and I think that the title of it was, it's going to be posted at smerconish.com today, something like "The Subject Joe Biden Doesn't Want to Discuss." In the same way that Romney should have discussed his Mormon faith, Biden should be more willing to discuss his stutter. And by the way, I recognize that not every gaffe made by Joe Biden is based on stuttering. I get it. I get the difference between the two. But I thought that the stage was perfectly set in those 2 minutes by the 13-year-old from New Hampshire in a way that Cory Booker and Michael Bloomberg and Bernie Sanders could never have done, because it provided a certain level of safety net for Joe, and Joe didn't need it. Joe didn't need it. Joe was on top of his game when he delivered those remarks. But had he made a mistake, I think we would have all been more willing to give him slack, having watched the 13-year-old share that side of Joe that Joe hasn't wanted to share himself. That's what I'm going to say on CNN in my opening commentary today. And then I pose the question, has the whole handling of this now provided a certain level of inoculation for Joe going forward because he had such an effective speech? In other words, the way I'm wording it as typed here as the survey question, has Trump's and really Fox, the Fox loop that they continue to show, have those questions that Trump and Fox have sought to raise about Joe's cognitive abilities now been neutralized? You'll be the judge. You'll tell me what you think. I'm going to talk about that at the outset of the program today, and I'm going to be welcomed by Ron Brownstein. Ron is such a brilliant guy. He is such a smart dude. This is a piece that he wrote during the course of the convention for The Atlantic, also posted at smerconish.com, or it will be in a couple of minutes' time. It is chock full of data about the way in which, and if you read Ron's piece, you're going to really get what just took place in the Democratic convention and what will take place in the Republican convention. Each is making a strong play for their base. And so the Democratic convention this week was really a diversity show, right? Young people, racial minorities, secular Americans, college-educated white Americans. That's what the Biden campaign focus is all about. And for Trump, it is white voters uneasy about demographic and cultural change, particularly those who are evangelical Christian, live in rural areas, or lack a college degree. That's the message that the Trump campaign is delivering, or that's the audience to whom the Trump campaign is delivering its message. Now, I think this is the last cycle where that type of an appeal has any shot. And it's because of the demographic change that's taking place in the country. Listen to this data. I'm going to read to you a paragraph. This, again, is Ron Brownstein writing in The Atlantic, and what I'm about to share with you is based on Pew Research information. I know it's early for some for this level of quantitative analysis, but hang with me because it's really amazing. From 2004, the last time a Republican presidential candidate won the popular vote, through 2016, the GOP's core group of non-college educated white voters tumbled from 52% to 42% of the national vote. There has been a 10% decrease in terms of what those folks constitute as a percentage of the American voting populace. Over that period, now listen to what happens in the swing states. Over that period, those same voters declined as a share of the electorate across a broad group of battleground states by at least 9 percentage points in the prototypical Midwest states of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and Iowa, by 8% in Ohio, 7 in Pennsylvania. They fell by 8 percentage points or more in the current and emerging Sun Belt battlegrounds of Georgia, Florida, Arizona, North Carolina, 9 in Virginia. The Trump campaign, here's the takeaway. The Trump campaign is putting all their chips on an increasingly narrow slice of the electorate. It is not a long-term strategy for the Republican Party. If the Republican, here, I'll say it even more simply. If the Republican Party doesn't figure out how to grow the tent, they will not be able to win, at least the popular vote, going forward. Maybe squeak out an electoral college vote, but this is a doomed strategy long term. I mean, Trump was able to get the moon and the stars to line up 4 years ago. The odds of him doing it twice in a row, slim, possible, slim, but long term, no. No. You can't sustain a party that is so narrow casting. Can you win in red states? Absolutely. Can you win state legislatures and governor's mansions and the U.S. Senate? Sure, because of the way in which we elect members of the Senate. But can you win the popular vote in a presidential race? Cannot. So Ron will be my guest. There's something really interesting. Hang on, I got to sip my coffee. How's everybody doing today? There's something really interesting that's playing itself out in Wisconsin. Kanye West. Yeah, it has to do with Kanye West. Kanye West sent out a tweet yesterday, and it said, "Praise God, look at all the ballots we're on. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Vermont, West Virginia, Colorado, Iowa, Utah, Minnesota, Tennessee, and Virginia." Kanye West is on all of those ballots. Where he's not on the ballot, at least as things stand now, is Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is arguably the linchpin for this election. So a lot of attention is on Wisconsin. A strange situation just played itself out in Wisconsin where, and there's great film footage of this that we'll be showing on television. 2 women who have Kanye West's petitions pull up to the building where they need to make the filing. And there are a couple of reporters who are waiting for them. And one of the reporters films the car that has Kanye's petitions in it, and he films his wristwatch. So you see that it's like 4:57, 4:58, 4:59, 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock was the deadline. Apparently, the individuals in the car, because of COVID restrictions, are on the telephone with the Wisconsin officials getting permission to come in the door. By the time they come in the door, it's after 5 o'clock, and they're too late, and the ballots get rejected. Now, you may say, who gives a damn, because Kanye West is not going to be elected president, and you'd be right in your second observation. But because of the narrow margin of Wisconsin last time, the Jill Stein voters, let me say it this way, the Jill Stein voters alone were larger than Donald Trump's margin in Wisconsin. So third-party candidates matter. If you throw in the Libertarian vote and the Green Party vote from last time, it dwarfed Trump's margin. And I think it's pretty clear that the Trump campaign, through winks and nods, is giving assistance to Kanye West, right? They want him on a variety of ballots, hoping that any voter Kanye siphons is coming from Joe and not from Trump. So we'll find out what went on in Wisconsin. It's a really great story. Scott Galloway is a brilliant guy. He is a business professor at NYU, very knowledgeable about a number of things, big tech being one of them, but education being another. I want to talk to Scott about how less than a quarter of American colleges and universities are providing the full range of in-classroom instruction and tutorial, et cetera, et cetera. Most are online or a hybrid model, and they're not refunding tuition, at least to the level that I think should be provided. And it's kind of an interesting question. This will sound counterintuitive, but the schools say our costs are actually going up in terms of getting ourselves ready and adapting to what's necessary to provide online instruction. We have escalating costs. Meanwhile, students, parents want refunds. How will that get resolved? I will talk to him. And then one last thing. This is really, this is going to come at the end of my show today, but please make sure that you're still here for it. I saw this headline in the LA Times this week. Can you read it? We now know the way in which the killing of George Floyd is going to be defended. And it is going to be defended on a causation basis. In very simplistic and lay terms, they're going to say that George Floyd was high and had pre-existing conditions, and that George Floyd's death was not, legally speaking, attributable to Derek Chauvin having his knee on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes with the support and assistance, as prosecutors make it, of the other officers who were there. And I have to say, there's a very well done, this too will be on my website in short order, legal analysis by a guy that I've known for a long time named George Parry, very smart, former prosecutor. He wrote it for the American Spectator, and you'll want to read it if you're interested in this case. And he essentially goes through and says that the prosecutors filed charges both times without the benefit of the toxicology. And if they had the toxicology, they would have realized, or they should have realized, that George Floyd was predisposed to dying that day because of the fentanyl in his system and his pre-existing condition, evidenced by the fact that he said, "I can't breathe," 6 or 7 times before he was even put in the back of the squad car. I know that many people won't be open to this because all we can think of is that horrific footage of 9 minutes of Chauvin with his knee on Floyd's neck. But there's something else. There's a photograph, and I'm going to show it on television today, from the training manual for that police department, showing an officer in a strikingly similar manner with his knee on as a teaching exercise on someone's neck on the ground. The point being that I think the defense is going to be not only that from a causation standpoint, can the cops not be held accountable, but secondly, that the training provided these police officers said that method of restraint was appropriate. Now, does that get you past the fact that for 9 minutes, George Floyd was incapacitated on the ground and saying, "I can't breathe"? It doesn't. But it does raise an interesting legal defense. Now, where you go to get a jury that would be open to even hearing that defense, I don't know. But I would simply say this. Remember the Rodney King case? In the Rodney King case, we all saw what we saw, were horrified, and in our minds convicted all of those cops. And then months passed, and the dust settled. And now a jury was brought in. And the jury had to look at what transpired, and the jury came to a different legal conclusion. I'm not saying that's where this is headed, but I am saying that there are some very interesting legal issues that are going to have to get resolved. And I'll talk about those as well. Whew, man, I'm exhausted. That's a hell of a lineup, isn't it? So I've got to go get to work. Think about today's survey question. Did Joe Biden's DNC acceptance speech now neutralize all of those Trump allegations about his cognitive abilities? And do you agree with me? Share this with some friends. Do you agree with me that just from a strategic standpoint, from an advance standpoint, from a production standpoint, putting Braden Harrington, the 13-year-old from New Hampshire, in the 10 p.m. hour. Think about this, gang. 8 hours of programming for the DNC, culminating with Joe Biden's acceptance speech. Most eyeballs are going to be tuned in the final hour. So you better produce it right. And what do they do in the final hour? Yeah, they had Bernie and Warren and Booker and all the others. They had Bloomberg. By the way, kind of interesting that Bloomberg got that kind of a late speaking slot, you know? My hunch is there's a little bit of a, hey, Mike, we need you to write a big check kind of thing going on here. But anyway, in the middle of all that, they stick in the 13-year-old because he's got a compelling story to tell, because it humanizes Joe Biden, and because it provides a certain level of inoculation. So that if Joe had stumbled, everybody would have just seen that young man explaining his similarity to Joe Biden. Brilliant. Brilliant. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I appreciate the size of this audience. Share this with a friend so that they will understand the question that I'm raising about whether Joe Biden is now inoculated going forward. And vote over at smerconish.com on today's survey question. I'll see you on CNN at 9 a.m. this morning, I hope. Be well.